Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Pro AV Today. I am your host, as always, Ben Thomas. As an industry, we have quite a few conversations about things like higher education and K 12. And, a lot of times those conversations center around classroom technology or teacher empowerment or, distributed technologies. And one of the places that might not always get the credit in the world of education is the world of athletic training and athletic complexes and locker rooms and things like that. So I wanted to spend some time today to talk about how our technology community, really through things like digital signage and audio distribution and video distribution, really are elevating some of those athletic complexes, whether it's weight rooms, locker rooms, even training rooms and video replay systems and things like that. So to talk about that, I brought on somebody who can answer a lot of those questions, and that's JJ Parker, CEO of Tightrope Media Systems and Carousel Digital Signage. JJ, you've got all the titles in the world, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Ben. Happy to be here.
Well, look, JJ, we'll start kind of at a high level, right? I think it's even funny to say, I even hesitate to say the word locker room, right? Because there's a lot of connotations that come with that. But I think athletic complexes are a good way to really describe how the quote unquote legacy locker room has evolved. Everything from connected weight rooms and connected film rooms all the way to the actual locker rooms themselves. And it's so interesting to see now, especially in the world of collegiate athletics, where there are millions and millions and millions of dollars being invested into a lot of these installations for things like player happiness, but recruitment, retention, things like that. And even at scale, a little bit in the high school world as well. It's incredible to see how much evolution has happened from the digitization of a lot of these places. And at a high level, what are some of those things that are really driving that innovation? I know digital signage obviously is one of those things. But what are some of the ways that you've seen these the digitization of these installations happen?
Yeah, it's funny when we got coordinated on talking about locker rooms. Like I think you even said like everybody's notion of what a locker room is probably some like thing from their high school experience, right? Like when you say locker room, what do you think of like in your mind?
Oh, just sweaty clothes on the floor, concrete, rusty lockers, and
Right.
that's a unique experience, I feel like, to those of us Americans who, at least on some level, had PE or
Yeah.
something. We can all relate to that image, I feel
It's
like.
like the last place you wanna go. Like, "Do you wanna go to the locker room?" "Nope, and that place is stinky and gross."
Yes.
Well, um, from, what we've been kind of seeing over the years, and we've been in the digital signage, industry set for over 25 years, like, before it was a word, right? Um, and, we do a lot of, like, what you said. We do a lot of higher ed, university campuses, uh, corporate campuses, and a lot of K-12 education. And what's been interesting to start with is to watch the college and the university adoption of digital signage because it started in like student unions, right? Just trying to inform the students of what's happening, like um, on campus. Then it kind of spread to like this wayfinding application, um, to help guide students and other guests around the campuses. Um, and then more recently, it's kind of moved into the athletics departments. Um, and, specifically uh, the athletic complexes, right, where they're building out. And I think we've seen this over the years is that a lot of universities are building out really amazing athletic complexes, not just for the proper athletes themselves, the ones that are on the football teams or on the basketball teams, but for all of the students, right?
Right.
So they want to make these spaces that are really welcoming to everybody on campus, not just their top tier athletes. Um, and then pushing in a little deeper, their top tier athletes in those like in the locker rooms, in the stadiums, in the places where they're playing, they've really wanted to create a much better, nicer experience than the like sweaty brick wall situation that it's been
Yeah.
in the years. And um, a couple of reasons why they're upscaling the locker rooms is really like around getting that top tier talent. For a lot of universities, their athletic programs are a major driver of revenue, frankly. And when it comes down to it,
Mhm.
it's a revenue driver, right? It's they want to get um, they want to get more people to the games. They want to have the best student athletes come in, and they want to make sure that those athletes and those students and those spectators have an amazing experience that might turn into future donations and things like that. So it's really like universities like thinking about the whole life cycle of their student journey. Um, you know, from um, being a freshman, coming all the way through the program, being a student athlete, graduating out, and then maybe giving back to the university after they've gone.
Well, it's so I always laugh, right? Because, even, in the world of collegiate athletics, right? They've always kind of had the best of the best from a facility standpoint. And now, I get the opportunity from time to time to get to go to some of these facilities and tour installations. And one local one is University of North Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And their practice facility is incredible, but then you start looking at their video distribution systems and their audio systems and even their aesthetic lighting control
Hmm.
systems and their recovery rooms. And it's interesting, and I laugh almost because we say the word digital signage, and especially in locker rooms, that means a lot of different things, right? You need to know the temperature, you need to know the condition of the
Mm.
grass, you need to know what your workout plan for the day is, you need to know what time your meals
Hmm.
are. And look, you're watching film and doing all those things. And I think in our minds, a lot of time as a community, we think digital signage and it's, oh, I need to send a welcome,
Mm.
screen over to, the entrance, right? And there's absolutely that
Yep.
application, right? That's a large oversimplification for sure. But I think, the world of video distribution and signal distribution evolves dramatically, kind of uniquely in that world because you're right, you have that donor engagement. So you have to have that showpiece element where you've got people touring and you've got to have people walking. But then there's that practical element. And that's one of the things too, really that I wanted to ask is, we talk about the video distribution side of things and even kind of the transition to IP, but you know, now there's a requirement of connectivity even beyond just a lot of smaller environments,
Mm.
right? We talk about these athletic
Hmm.
complexes and they are cities in
Yeah.
some cases, right? So we can't get by with "Oh, we've got 5 screens showing what we need." Like, there's a lot of scale in there. How have you
Yep.
seen a lot of that scale and need evolve, especially on the video distribution side of
Well,
things?
yeah. So, like back in the day, most of that video distribution used to be coaxial, right? Like it would be
Right.
like modulated cable TV channels. The the architects when they built some of those facilities, especially in 70s, 80s, even 90s, were just throwing coax cables um, into the corners of the hallways. And that there we go. We can put TVs over here. Um, and a lot of those the infrastructure, a lot of the building themselves, it's hard to run cables through there, right? It's hard to run new stuff in there. So, um, and even power, right? I mean, you think about like all of the things that are required to just hang a simple panel onto a concrete wall. Well, a lot of times it becomes not that simple. So, obviously, that's the integrators and all of our partners help get all of those nitty gritties figured out. But um, having in especially in the realm of digital signage, when you're putting signs and kiosks and things in places that maybe weren't originally intended to have it. Um, making sure that all of those players are on the network, they're network accessible. Possibly some of them sometimes need to be wireless because we can't actually run network cables there. Um, Obviously, the best is to run hard cables everywhere. Um, but yeah, so when we're thinking about like distribution, it's on the network. It's sometimes it's PoE, right? Like it's powered over the Ethernet, so it's powered remotely. Even down to the displays. Sometimes, like we've done a couple locker room installs where there are displays above each locker in the locker room, and the infrastructure for that is all PoE. So they didn't have to pull power all the way through. Every little bay, they could just power it from their network switch. So
You better have a good switch, though.
oh, yeah, you gotta make sure you have the right switch. That's beyond my pay grade to recommend those, but yeah, kinda dealing with some of those basic things like you're saying is like, how do we get connectivity and how do we get power to these places and what technology is like the easiest to do that, especially when what was there was probably not the right thing, like coax.
Well, I wanna ask kind of about that specifically too, I think look, I'm shielded from reality of football outside of Texas, and I acknowledge that. But it's interesting because a lot of the times, anecdotally, I see these new athletic complexes and locker rooms as new builds, as
Mm,
most of the time they are, right? You
mhm.
you talk about funding, you talk about all these different things, and that really, not that it's not a challenge from an infrastructure standpoint, but when you're building a new building and have, you could, spec all your ports wherever
Yep,
you want them. That's not as big of a challenge as a retrofit, right?
right.
I'm curious, when you talk about these retrofits, do you typically see incremental upgrades? Are you seeing folks really want to do, a wholesale changeover every 7 to 10 years, or is it a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. I mean, like you said, it goes kinda down to, like, funding and buildings, and that's a whole, uh, big topic, but, uh, when we've been involved in projects, they're either, um Kind of really they're either new builds, and new builds is the easiest, because you can kind of design screens and things exactly where you want them to be. The retrofit stuff, uh, the easiest if you're going to do a retrofit is like a major sort of like gut, right? Um, a major remodel, um, and then the hardest, of course, is just trying to like put screens and information and things in place in your existing building without really doing any major changes. Um, so, uh, yeah, there's uh, a lot of the customers will start. I've noticed with like doing the very simple thing, like, hey, we'll put a display in the common area here. We'll put one on the wall in the locker room. We'll put one over here. And then as they go through and start doing their building refreshes, digital signage will become a bigger and bigger part of those refreshes.
Well, and what's cool too is, there typically is some level of infrastructure rebuilding, but even outside of the world, just digital signage specifically, there's so many things that you can do from an aesthetic
Oh
perspective
yeah.
that really help create a lot of value, right?
Yep.
Uplighting, graphics, reskinning things. There's a lot of things that you can
Yep.
do, but I really think, and it's like I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit uniquely suited to the world of athletics, where they remind me it reminds me actually a little bit of like a security war room or something
Mm,
like that, or a command center, where you've got to integrate so many different pieces of data from so many disparate
mhm,
sources. And one of those sources too, and I'm curious, I don't know if a lot of these athletic complexes sort of live, I don't know that I would say off the grid of
mm,
the educational institutions themselves. I don't
mhm.
know that that's correct terminology necessarily, but do you see a lot of collaboration between the university itself and even things like integrating emergency response systems into their field
Yep.
houses, or integrating, communication systems? Is that something that typically is a need, or do you find typically that they sort of live isolated in their own ecosystem?
Yeah, well, specifically on college campuses, we find that it will often start, and universities and colleges are notoriously fragmented like this. Is we'll start with like uh, providing signage and our CMS software to the athletics department or to one particular college in the university. And if it gets too big, the university, the IT people at the university be like, wait a second, what's going on here? Why do we have, you know, three CMS providers here? And then they'll go and unify all of it. So um, I'm sure a lot of the listeners recognize that motion out of the behavior of universities. Uh, but to me, the athletics complexes, stadiums, all of that's part of the university system. So tying in all of the emergency alert things that are happening on campus is absolutely critical. I mean, for us, integration with like the common alert protocol and making sure that their alert systems are feeding into the visual the digital signage and the visual alerting systems is really important. So we've got university customers who absolutely push their alert notification integrations with Carousel all the way into the locker rooms because if something goes down, we got to get people out and somewhere safe.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, we talk about IP a little bit from a signal flow standpoint. IP obviously gives you more flexibility in the long term for, I almost hate to say the word future proofing, right? That's sort of like the forbidden
Hmm.
word in the industry right now, but it gives you some level of future proofing, right? And it extends, in theory, the life cycle of an installation. But, just at a high level, what typically do you see from an installation life cycle perspective? Is it that 7-10 years, or is it really that active replacement once you've done a new build or a full retrofit? You just more aiming to change out displays, speaker systems,
Mhm.
or do you see full refreshes every 7 to 10 years?
Well, that's a great question. So in our early digital signage experience, I think this is probably common across all signage installs. A lot of it was like Windows computers as the media players. So
Yeah.
it was either, it was either like
The
a Windows,
the NUC in a box behind the
right?
TV.
Like a box behind the TV, or even before that, it might have been like uh, some sort of player device, a playback device in a head end distributed out through classic IP video techniques, right? Like VoIP,
Hey, Raspberry Pi made a living off that.
right?
Don't knock it.
um, Today what we see are installations where there's a media player behind every single device, and whether that's showing the same content or different content, um, it's much more of like a one-to-one player to display topology, which works really well because you can discretely change the content on each one of those, or synchronize them. And then, if one goes down, you can just replace the one and the whole room doesn't go down. So there's kind of some good redundancies around that one-to-one approach. Um, and we have seen over the course of the past few years, a lot of the Windows devices that were deployed, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, a lot of that stuff's getting ripped out because that was just clearly the wrong choice. I mean, it wasn't the wrong choice. It's kind of like the only choice back in the day. But and like you said, like Raspberry Pis or some other weird homebrew thing that maybe universities are awesome because they do have a lot of times the technical ability to do a homebrew solution. But a lot of times that doesn't last super long until they realize, like, oh yeah, that one student who wrote the code that does this thing doesn't go here anymore.
It's the same thing with churches too. You
Yeah.
wanna you wanna go see a system, built on,
Hmm.
toothpicks. Those are the best 2 places
Yeah.
to go look is universities and houses of worship.
So what we've done at Carousel is we really focus on two primary media player hardware uh, partners, which is BrightSign and Apple. Those two have proven over the long over the long term to be like the very best ROI. And what we think about a lot for a lot of these installations, it's not what's the initial cost, it's what's the total cost of ownership. Because to have a player go down and then you guys have to roll a truck to go fix it, that costs a lot of money, right? The end users will be under maybe like a service contract, or the integrator will be providing those services to keep that signage network up, and it costs money every time you got to roll a truck. Right? So for us, we like to really think about, like, how can we provide the most like stable, scalable um, system with the best hardware partners, so the total cost of ownership over like a 10-year period is as low as possible. And sometimes that means that the initial purchase is higher, but that's the way we kind of orient. And so we don't really support the Raspberry Pis or the Amazon Fire Sticks or anything like that, because we know, you know, that $25 thing goes down and it's going to cost the integrator $250 to roll the truck out there to fix it.
Yeah, well, you're right, and, we're at the point now where so many of these are real enterprise installations,
Hmm.
right? And you have to have that level of connectivity, even just beyond the infrastructure and the digital signage, right? You've gotta have your audio distribution systems, you need
Yep.
network connectivity. I need to be able to control, shutters and all. I mean, almost like a freaking smart home, if
Oh
we're
yeah.
being honest.
Yep.
But these places are so technologically advanced, and I think it really has done a lot for athlete safety, athlete comfortability. Obviously, they're recruiting tools
Yep.
like crazy, but also driving revenue on the back end, even from a
Hmm.
donations standpoint too. So it's incredible to see how these have evolved, and I think you kind of nailed it when you talk about the multi-purpose use of these spaces now, and that is what necessitates an enterprise level installation
Yep.
because no longer, like you mentioned, will the Raspberry Pi behind the TV always be
Yep.
the best answer, right? Especially when you
Right.
decentralize
The
a lot of
other
those.
the other thing that we'll see in athletics is a lot of the facilities are becoming multi-use facilities, right? So it's not dedicated football. It's like, well, we're doing football and then we're doing soccer and then we're doing, so um So using digital signage and your lighting controls and really creating like an experience that might change a couple times on a weekend, right? Like this morning in soccer, it's all branded soccer. Boom, we flip the switch. Now this is all football, right? And we change the color scheme, we change the content on the signage. So really thinking about how we are creating spaces that are multi-use but still feel like the football team's stadium. And but when the soccer team walks in there, it feels like the soccer team's stadium. And this all goes to like things like you were talking about, like player pride, um, team unity. And from a facilities perspective, it shows respect to the players too. Right. So um when we're kind of involved as an industry, as an AV tech industry who is supporting customers, I always like to make sure we're thinking about like how are we creating spaces and what kind of feelings are we creating in those spaces. And you kind of hit it with lighting, like that's another really powerful thing, right? Simply changing the lighting can have a really big impact because people are ultimately really affected by their environment.
Yep, absolutely, and you see a lot of that same, logic actually used in healthcare as well, which
Hmm.
I'm sure you guys do some fantastic work in, but I'll tell you what, JJ, we appreciate you having on and really kinda breaking down the world of the video distribution and technology installations inside a lot of these athletic complexes and locker rooms. It's been helpful to kinda hear, just from a technology side, how people are leveraging these and some of the best practices and
Yep.
applications. So, I'll tell you what, we appreciate you coming on the show today and look forward to having you back on soon, and thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check us out next time on Pro AV Today.